Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Celine Brandt. I'm manager for As You Go. As You Go is a Belgian consulting firm. We are partner of Salesforce, and we help our client connecting with their customers. Today, I would like to share with you one challenge that I encountered several times as a project leader. I started to lead Salesforce implementation project almost 5 years ago, first on Marketing Cloud, then Pardot, then Service Cloud. And this challenge is the fact that we need to manage very broad scopes and also stakeholders with different profiles and different objectives. So here is the question. As a project lead, did you experience this situation when all stakeholders have different priorities and you need to arbitrate between these different stakeholders? And I'm sure that lots of people here in the room experienced that situation already. And that's even more challenging if you are a consultant, so an external advisor, and you need to arbitrate between different internal people with different internal objectives. And this is the moment when you need some structure, methodology, or a tool to guide you in that process. So this is our agenda for today, so I will give a few words about the context, since the context of this study is about Service Cloud. Then I will explain a little bit what is the balance scorecard for those of you who don't know, and we will apply the balance scorecard model to our use case, a Service Cloud implementation. And afterward, I will illustrate that model with a real-life situation, a real case that we had in the past with one of our clients. So first of all, Service Cloud. I don't know if you are all familiar with Service Cloud, but mainly we are about managing all the after-sale interactions with our clients. So mostly people who are the users of Service Cloud are the agents of the call centers or back office agents also, or key account managers. And so in such a project of Service Cloud implementation, you have lots of features available. So you have all different channels. You can manage your cases by call, by email, web to case, and all these type of channel. You have different types of features like knowledge, chatter, you can manage libraries of documents in your tool, etc. So it's sometimes very difficult to decide which object, which feature is the most important. And when you have very large scope and lots of different stakeholders, they also have different objectives. So when looking at the agents, they will have the objective of improving and optimizing the user experience. So they want less click, less scroll down, etc. The supervisor, they want to improve the performance. So they want to have a view on reports, dashboards. They want to assign priorities to the different cases, etc. So this is another type of objectives. Then we have the objectives of the product owner, of the project lead, with a focus on the timeline, focus on the return on investment, etc. So difficult to deal with all these different objectives and to know which one we need to follow. And that's when we define the scope. And even after the definition of the scope, there are always some stakeholders who come to add some small changes, some small new features. Yes, but this is only a minor request. I'm sure you are also familiar with this. So how to keep the focus on the scope, we also need a model for that. So this is why companies should have a strict internal requirement management process that is performance-driven And the model that we use for that is the balance scorecard model. So this is a model that was developed in the 19th. And the main idea behind that model is that we cannot focus on one single performance indicator, and we cannot focus only on financial performance indicators. So we need to focus on financial and non-financial performance indicators. Why is it important to have all our stakeholders aligned behind key performance indicator? First, when they have the same goal in mind, they are more engaged, so it will facilitate the change management process, but also it will facilitate decision making. If we have a clear goal in mind that is the same for everybody, meaning to maximize one or the other KPI, it will be very rational decision making. And finally, it gives you also some ways to monitor your project after the implementation. So this scorecard of key performance indicator will help you to prioritize between projects, to prioritize between epics, prioritize between user stories, and also to monitor the implementation of your project. So the basic idea is that we cannot use one single measure of performance. So the model contains 4 different dimensions. The first one is the customer perception. So here we investigate the performance of the company from the customer side, meaning satisfaction, retention, etc. Operational business process efficiency, we are talking here about quality and about really optimization of the processes. Organizational capacity, we talk here about human resources, technology, culture, etc. And financial performance, that's the most common one, with the focus on the gross margin and the reduction of the cost to serve. Now, if we apply that theory to our projects of Service Cloud implementation, what are the key performance indicators that are important in the care department and that we will follow using our scorecard? So if we focus on the customer dimension, I don't know if you are familiar with CxPi and VELO. So CxPi is a measure of customer satisfaction. So after the interaction with your customer, you send a survey and the customer will rate that particular interaction. So it's not a general measure of customer satisfaction. It's really a satisfaction with the contact, the care contact. VELO is a measure of how quick the agent was in answering the question of the customer. So here it's really about rapidity, quick. Then as financial performance, so these are the most common one. We focus on the cost to serve and the gross margin. If we look at organizational capacity, we will focus on human action and the time that the agent will spend in serving the customer, so the average handling time, AHT. Productivity is also another KPI, so which is a measure of how many cases were managed by one agent in a certain period. And finally, cross-selling is also an opportunity that is covered by that dimension. And finally, the last one, business process efficiency, will be captured through the contact rate, so how many times that customer contacted the call center during a certain period. The first time right means the percentage of cases that were solved with one single interaction divided by the total number of cases. And finally, the query resolution time, that is different from the average handling time, because average handling time is really the human treatment of the case, while query resolution time is made of the whole time that the case will stay in the system, also in the backlog, etc. And this is how we came to that basic scorecard made of 7 key performance indicators. Of course, depending on your client, you may have different objectives. For instance, if one of the objectives is to increase retention, you may have one additional KPI that is the churn rate, for instance, and you may focus on reducing that churn rate. This scorecard can be complemented by other specific KPIs. That's what I just said. So now I will illustrate this theory with one example that we saw with one of our clients. So this is a client from the utilities industry. That was a large project with lots of different stakeholders. So we have different business units, B2B, B2C, and we also had operations. So all these people had different expectations from the project. The focus of the company at that moment was customer centricity, operational efficiency, a rational decision making, and this is also why that model has been developed, and focus on cost and performance. It was not the beginning of the Service Cloud implementation project. We already had 2 periods of implementation before, so it was quite mature. We already had email to case implemented, call to case. We already had live agent chat as well as a channel, paper to case, web to case. We had a quite advanced escalation process also in place. Knowledge, and so the management of articles in the system, integration, surveys, Lightning for Outlook. I don't know if you are familiar with that program that allows to create case from your Outlook. So for the agents who works mainly with emails, they can decide to push one email in Salesforce and create a case based on that email. And finally, reporting and dashboards. So, very practically, we started with our scorecard. So that was our first step. So we have developed that scorecard. And then the next step was to do some qualitative workshops with our stakeholders. So with product owner, with sponsors, with analysts, and also with agents, in order to elicit all their requirements for the next phases. And then we had to analyze each epics, so each topic, in line with these key performance indicator that we have defined. So I will show you a bit more in depth how we did that. So first, we defined our scorecard, and then we had a qualitative session with all these people all together. We used WhoClap. I don't know if you are familiar with that app. We asked them to elicit all the topics that still needed some improvement in the system, and this is how we defined our list of epics. And based on that, they were asked to give more information on each epic specifically, and this is how we came to our associative network, let's call it that way, that we have here on the map. Now the next step is the most challenging, because we have all the requirements, we have the key performance indicator, but how to define which epics has the highest impact on the KPI. There is no secret for that. So we had 3 different solutions. Either we had a previous experience on another Service Cloud implementation project, and we could say that this type of epic could have a high impact on this and this KPI. Or we sometimes also use some Salesforce success stories. So if you look at the Salesforce Community Cloud, partner community, you have access to success stories, sometimes with figures. So these are also available to evaluate the potential of the different features. And finally, the last opportunity was really to time the agents. So we had analysts who really time the different actions of the agents, and we try to evaluate the percentage of time reduction that this particular feature would bring to their work. And this is how we came finally to these 4 KPIs. So the first one is process optimization. So lots of actions still happened outside Salesforce. That's just an example. This was just for one of our clients, but it can be very different from one client to the other. Process optimization was the inclusion of some particular actions inside Salesforce. For instance, up to that moment, if they had to choose some contact data, they had to do it outside Salesforce. And so we created some visibility on external screens in Salesforce so that the full flow could happen in Salesforce. So that's process optim. For instance, also the possibility to send duplicate invoice. So there were lots of requests about sending duplicate invoice, and they had to reach another system and then create their case in Salesforce. So that was absolutely not efficient. Now they can do everything in the same system. The 360 view, so bring more information about the customers inside Salesforce to have everything at the same place, but also more information about product and service, like the product catalog in Salesforce. The definition of case priority automatically based on defined criteria, and the assignment, the automatic assignment of cases. So now the agents do not need to click on a case, so they will not scroll the whole list of cases. Each time they are done with a case and they close it, a new case will pop up. And so this will also reduce the time between 2 cases. And finally, cross-channel, let's say, add certain teams in the tool that were not part of Salesforce, or include some agents who previously used Lightning for Outlook to push cases in Salesforce. Now we directly included these email addresses in Salesforce because it was more efficient. So to conclude, what are the key learnings? So first of all, we should define the KPI of our balance scorecard upfront. We should communicate about this KPI to the different stakeholders to have them aligned on the same goal, to have them engaged, and to facilitate the change management process. We should use that tool to prioritize projects, prioritize epics, and prioritize user stories. And finally, the model will also be used to monitor the success of the project and sometimes refine some functionalities if we notice that the return on these functionalities is less than expected. And this is it. Thank you very much for your attention. Do you have questions? Yes.
So this is a framework of yours to prioritize epics, if I understand correctly, right?
Yes.
Like epics can be worth of work of 2 months, 3 months. Like epics can be of different sizes, right? That's
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
So, and I assume that this is a very time-consuming effort to do the balance scorecard for every epic.
Mm-hmm.
One epic has 50 stories inside and the other 5. Shouldn't you recognize this as well, or how do you handle this?
So we had to stay very pragmatic in our work. So the idea is to use that model when it's necessary, so not systematically. So we did not assign impact to each success story individually. But during a meeting, for instance, if there was a disagreement between different stakeholders on do we include this user story or do we include that user story, Then we analyzed what is the impact on these 2 user stories on the success, the key performance indicator that were defined. So we did the analysis at the epic level and not really in euros. So what we did is we assigned low, middle, or high impact for each of the epics. So that there was no real calculation with euros, but that was sufficient. So we tried to stay pragmatic. Goal was not to have a full period just dedicated to the analysis of the KPIs and the impact, just to stay rational. Do you have other questions? Yes.
Have you calculated ROI on this implementation for the customer?
So we are still in the process of monitoring now the effects of that implementation, and we still see improvement each month. So we are still in the learning curve, let's say, after the implementation, but we already see some very good impact, yes.
Did you quantify that also?
Yes, afterward we quantify, yes. Yes, and there was also a business case upfront, and we oppose our result afterward with the business case that was done upfront, yes. Other questions? No? Thank you. Thank you.